So for decades, linguists have pondered over what relationship there is between Greek and Armenian, and how exactly they fit into the broader Indo-European language tree. Despite Greek being thought of as such a fundamental European language, it's been recognized that it's somewhat out in the wilderness, existing in a completely different branch than other Indo-European languages of Europe, with its closest companion appearing to be Armenian. Now, this has led to a number of theories, such as the Greco-Armenian branch, which was thought of as the ancestor of both Greek and Armenian. Some people have proposed that Greeks migrated from the Caucasus, while others said the Armenians were descendants of the Greeks. But more recently, it has been proposed that Greek and Armenian are actually more closely related to the Indo-Aryan branch, and this has been used by some to propose a Caucasus or even South Asian origin for the Indo-European languages. Well, as it turns out, modern genetic studies have finally given us a decisive answer on this question, and the answer was not what some expected. Now, if you've been out there on the internet following topics about ancient history, culture, genetics, or discussions about modern ethnic identities, I'm sure you will have come across this battle between Nordicists and Mediterraneanists. And maybe some of these people are serious, but I tend to think a lot of it is just banter. However, there is really a divide between Northern and Southern Europeans that can be traced all the way back to the Bronze Age and the spread of the Proto-Indo-European peoples, language, and culture. This divergence has a genetic basis in that the further south in Europe you go, the less admixture there is from the steppe pastoralists associated with Proto-Indo-European languages. That's because there were larger populations of Neolithic farmers living in these regions during the Copper and early Bronze Age when the migrations occurred, and through mixing with the local populations over time, their genetic ancestry is, as a percentage, smaller than in the north. So with the Greeks, there is actually an additional difference in that their language, while Indo-European, cannot be matched up with other Indo-European language groups. For centuries, scholars have puzzled over the origins of the Greek language and its place within the Indo-European language tree. Though such an important language of European history and culture, Greek could not be neatly aligned with any other European language group such as Italic, Celtic, Germanic, or Slavic. In fact, there seems to be a fairly significant difference between Greek and these other groups. However, for some time, another theory had been growing, that the language of the Greeks and Armenians descended from the Yamnaya steppe population, which spread southwest into the Balkans and southeast into the Armenian highland, and that this event was separate from that which brought the Indo-European languages into Central and Western Europe. Now a study has been published which purports to demonstrate exactly this. Titled "Ancient Genomics Support Deep Divergence Between Eastern and Western Mediterranean Indo-European Languages" by Fulya Yediaye et al. I'm pronouncing your name wrong, I apologize. But this study set out to find the genetic relationship and divergence between Italic, Celtic, Greek, and Armenian, using 224 individuals dating from between 5200 BP to 2100 BP. Now, their intention was to discover how they were related to one another and how this might be able to explain the spread of the Indo-European language family. And what they discovered is that though all the groups possess steppe ancestry, there are subtle differences between that steppe ancestry that reveals different points of origin. They were also able to derive an approximate timeline for the spread of this ancestry, which may be more accurate than earlier studies. Few things have been more romanticized in history of late than the initial spread of the Proto-Indo-European peoples. It is, of course, tempting to imagine a united army of warriors sweeping across Europe, wiping all before them. Conan, what is best in life? To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of their women. It likely wasn't quite as dramatic as that, though it surely did involve conquest on a massive scale. Now, due to the steppe lifestyle, the ancient Indo-Europeans may have acted in similar ways to later steppe groups, such as the Huns, Mongols, or Turks. Tribal alliances were likely forged through marriage bonds. These marriages united large numbers of people together as they migrated to acquire new lands. This was a conquest, evidenced by their language and culture forms becoming dominant, even in places where they were not the majority of the population. So in some places, it seems that the conquest by these migrating groups happened quite rapidly, but a subsequent blending with the local population took place over many hundreds of years, eventually forming a cultural and genetic assimilation of peoples. The initial spread of the steppe ancestry was assumed to have been from the steppes of southern Ukraine and Russia, and into the forests and coasts of the Baltic regions, Belarus, and Poland. The study does indeed find that a steppe-like population conquered the globular amphora culture in Eastern Europe, and from this process formed what is known as the corded ware culture. However, it isn't certain that this group was actually the Yamnaya. In fact, there is some evidence to suggest it wasn't, such as the non-correspondence of major Y haplogroups. The formation of the corded ware culture may have come from an archaeological ghost population. That is, a people that has not been archaeologically identified. I put forward some of my own theories on this in my video on who were the Proto-Indo-Europeans. This ghost population would have been closely linguistically and genetically connected to the Yamnaya, but distinct, likely speaking a slightly different dialect or even a closely related but separate language. Though still possessing very high levels of steppe ancestry, the corded ware culture takes on a more Neolithic farmer ancestry, and certain cultural aspects also begin to change. They were no longer living on the steppe, and their lifestyle began to adapt to the local environment of the forests, swamps, rivers, and seas of northern Europe. At least some of this group eventually migrates further east and forms the Indo-Iranian Sintashta culture. The Bell Beaker people, who spread throughout Western Europe and south into Italy, were likely an earlier Western offshoot of corded ware. However, this additional globular amphora ancestry that formed the basis of the corded ware culture, Sintashta culture, and Bell Beaker culture, was not present in those of steppe ancestry who spread into Greece and Armenia. Evidence for a Yamnaya migration south into Greece from Moldova is found around 2200 BC, and by 1800 BC, the Yamnaya were present throughout Greece, but especially concentrated in the Peloponnese, which would not coincidentally become the heartland of the Mycenaean culture. Now, in some early samples, this Yamnaya lineage is entirely unmixed. Unmixed, that is, with the Neolithic Greek population, but also unmixed with any intermediary Balkan population. Now, I've long believed that the Yamnaya were the progenitors of the Greek language, but if you watch my documentary on the origins of the Mycenaeans, which I suggest you do, I put forward an intermediary Balkan language group which could explain Albanian, Dacian, and others. Now, such a group did develop eventually, but the genetics and timeline suggests that Greek was not part of it, and the origins of this grouping is not straightforward. Middle Bronze Age samples show the Central Balkans as a three-way mixture of corded ware, Yamnaya, and Bell-Beaker lineages, with local Balkan languages and cultures very likely emerging as a synthesis of these three groups. It was only after the Yamnaya moved into Greece that there was a backwash from corded ware and Bell-Beaker groups southward into the Balkans, mixing with the local Neolithic population there, and likely creating a regional language group during that time. Now, in the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age, the genetic studies also show corded ware and Bell-Beaker influence in Greece itself. Some of this has been theorized earlier through purely archaeological means, which show cultural influences of the Celtic Urnfield culture spreading down through the Balkans as far as Greece. Now, as the Yamnaya population mixed with the local Neolithic farmer population of Greece during the course of the Bronze Age, the percentage of their steppe admixture decreases. However, it allows us to say with almost absolute certainty that the Greek language developed directly from the language spoken by the Yamnaya. They would have acquired influence and vocabulary from the pre-Greek Neolithic farmer population, but the core of the language was a direct straight line from that spoken by the Yamnaya. This has a dramatic effect on how we think about the ancient Greeks and Mycenaeans. Suddenly, the theory that some had proposed, that the mythical centaurs and Hrion, the great teacher, actually reflect cultural memories of the horsebacked Yamnaya warriors, seems much more plausible. Poseidon, being the lord of horses, may explain why there are more dedications to him during the Mycenaean period than even Zeus, but also gives us a different perspective on how he might have been envisioned in earlier times. Possibly even as Lord of the Black Sea specifically, as the Yamnaya had long dwelt north of it. However, it also adds to the mystery of the formation of the other Indo-European languages. For a long time, people believed that the Yamnaya were the ultimate source for the spread of Proto-Indo-European. Now we know that they were really only the direct progenitors of two, Greek and Armenian. The basis for the Armenian language seems to have been formed around the same time as the Greek, through a direct spread of the Yamnaya culture across the Caucasus and into the Armenian highlands. I actually postulated this already in my documentary on the Armenians, which I, of course, highly recommend. Now, the study finally provides clear evidence that both Greek and Armenian descend directly from the language spoken by the Yamnaya. So Greco-Armenian is not just simply a theory, but fact. However, another name for that language group would simply be Yamnaya. The study also found that the Phrygians, an Anatolian group who spoke an Indo-European language, but whose origins have been debated for not just hundreds but thousands of years, were very likely derived from a migration out of the Balkans during the end of the Bronze Age. This directly corresponds to the statement on their origins made by Herodotus in the 5th century. The theory had been abandoned by many in more recent times, but the genetics appear to bear out Herodotus. There were also some interesting results found in regards to Cyprus. During the Bronze Age, it was a cultural and ethnic melting pot, with many different influences from the Levant and Anatolia to Greece and beyond. This even included a Bell-Beaker individual, as well as one who originated from the corded ware culture, dating to around 1700 BC. He carried the Y haplogroup I1, common in Scandinavia. Presumably, this individual was a long-distance trader who happened to die in Cyprus, but it shows just how far-ranging trade and social connections really were at that time. Cyprus seems to have served as a Bronze Age trading hub with the Eastern Mediterranean, and this ethnic diversity reflects this. The Greek language would seem most likely to have established itself there firmly at some point during the late Mycenaean period. Yet this Yamnaya admixture was spread even wider, found among Bronze and Iron Age samples from the Levant, providing genetic evidence for Mycenaean colonization along the Levantine coast. In Central and Western Europe, however, the situation was different. Steppe ancestry was spread through Britain, Ireland, France, Italy, and Spain by the Bell Beakers, which the study has been able to isolate from that of the Yamnaya who gave rise to the Mycenaeans, revealing a deep divergence. In regards to Central and Western Europe, the study concludes that the theory of Italo-Celtic is likewise correct. Both groups show clear evidence of having emerged from the Bell Beaker population. Now, this rules out the theory of Italo-Germanic, with the Germanic language emerging from corded ware directly. It likewise rules out the theory of Indo-Greek, with the early Indo-Iranian groups having mostly developed from corded ware rather than Yamnaya. Now, Bell Beaker ancestry is present in northern Italy at least since 2000 BC. The Tarahumara culture was not only culturally similar to the Unitica culture in Germany, but genetically derived from the same source. In fact, just like Greco-Armenian could be called Yamnaya, the Celto-Italic language group could probably more properly be called Bell Beaker, as several other languages difficult to classify as either Celtic or Italic likely derived from it, such as Venetic or the Iberian Lusitanian language. Now, pre-Celtic languages in Britain, Ireland, or Spain would have been part of this same linguistic grouping, and so trade and smaller-scale population movements can account for these languages developing within the Celtic linguistic sphere, while retaining a high degree of regionalism. Now, this relates directly to my theory of a linguistic continuum which developed between the continental Celts and those of Britain and Ireland during the Bronze Age. Through trade and continuous population movements back and forth, may have been enough to sustain common linguistic developments over time that saw the rise of a Proto-Celtic form over a much larger area than sometimes assumed, and may have included Britain and Ireland right from the start. Likewise, forms of Celtic or assumed Celtic in Iberia may in fact be closely related languages that share some of the same features, having developed from the same Bell Beaker language group. This can be compared to the spread and then regionalization of Latin, from which arose Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, and Romanian. Now, as I put forward in my documentary on the origins of the Romans, the study supports the concept of northern Italy functioning as a melting pot. Now, based on this evidence, we can conclude with a high degree of certainty also that the corded ware culture is the ancestor of Balto-Slavic, Germanic, and Indo-Iranian. So for mythical comparative analysis that I sometimes engage in, this has big implications, right? Given the findings of this study, you would not expect Celtic mythology to be able to be matched up precisely with Greek mythology. You would expect to find then the closest parallels between Celtic and Italic. And in a book that I'm currently working on, I do go to some lengths to show this. So even though most European groups are formed from this mixture of steppe ancestry and Neolithic farmer, they don't actually come out the same. They are extremely diverse and from a very ancient period, such that even the origins of this steppe ancestry is different and has significant implications for how we understand their languages and cultures. The Greeks really are quite unique, and this new study should help us to appreciate the origins of their culture and language even more. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and consider supporting this channel, because I can only do this with your help. I'd like to thank all of my supporters out there. And as always, stand tall.